The sound of shattered glass echoed through the empty practice room. "Wait, Hyun, that's not what I meant." Felix's voice cracked as he reached forward, but Hyun had already stepped back. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Outside, rain hammered against the building's windows, turning the city beyond into a blur of silver and black. For a moment, neither of them moved. Hyun stood frozen beside the mirror wall. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly at his sides. The expression on his face wasn't anger, it was worse. It was disappointment, and Felix had never been more terrified of anything in his life. Hours earlier, everything had seemed normal. The group had just finished a demanding rehearsal. Everyone was exhausted but relieved. Laughter filled the hallways as members packed their bags and prepared to leave. Felix had always been the type of person who carried sunlight wherever he went. He smiled easily, he laughed loudly, and whenever people around him were hurting, he instinctively tried to make things better. But there was one secret he had been carrying for months. A secret he thought would protect everyone, especially Hyun. Hyun was different from the others. Behind his confidence and artistic brilliance lived a young man haunted by expectations. He rarely talked about it. Most people only saw the talented performer. Felix saw the sleepless nights, the hidden anxiety. Pressure that never seemed to leave. Perhaps that was why Felix had made the decision. A decision he now regretted more than anything. Earlier that afternoon, a representative from a prestigious international project had approached Felix privately. The opportunity was extraordinary. A chance to work overseas, a chance to build a career on a global scale, a chance most people would never receive. But accepting it would mean leaving, possibly for a long time. Felix had not told anyone, not even Hyun. Especially not Hyun, because he knew exactly how much those words would hurt, so he kept postponing the conversation. One day became a week became a month, and eventually the secret became too large to carry. Unfortunately, secrets rarely stay hidden forever. Felix discovered that truth tonight. Someone else had told Hyun first, not Felix, not his best friend, not the person who promised they would always be honest with him, someone else. The memory of Hyun's expression when he learned the truth replayed endlessly in Felix's mind. Not anger, not jealousy, just heartbreak. "You were really going to leave without telling me?" The question had been quiet. That made it hurt even more. Felix remembered struggling to answer, because there was no good answer, no explanation that could erase months of silence, no excuse strong enough to justify betrayal. "I was trying to protect you." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew they sounded wrong. Hyun laughed bitterly. "Protect me?" His eyes glistened beneath the practice room lights. "Do you know what hurts most?" Felix couldn't speak. "You decided for me." Silence filled the room. Rain continued tapping against the windows. "You assumed I was too weak to hear the truth." Felix felt his chest tighten, because Hyun was right. Without realizing it, Felix had treated his friend like someone fragile. Someone who needed to be sheltered, someone incapable of handling reality. The realization struck harder than any accusation. Hyun turned away. For years they had shared victories and failures, long rehearsals, late-night conversations, dreams that felt impossible, and yet Felix had hidden the most important decision of his life. How could trust survive something like that? "I wasn't trying to hurt you." The words sounded small, pathetic, but they were true. Hyun finally looked back. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I know," that answer surprised Felix, because there was no hatred behind it, only sadness, and sadness was far more difficult to fix. The room suddenly felt colder. Felix realized something painful. Not all wounds were created by cruelty. Sometimes the deepest wounds came from love, from good intentions, from people trying so desperately to protect each other that they ended up causing the very pain they wanted to prevent. For the first time, Felix understood that honesty required courage. And he had not been brave enough. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, two friends stood facing the wreckage of trust neither had intended to destroy. Felix lowered his gaze. "I was scared." Confession emerged almost as a whisper. Hyun remained silent. "I was scared you'd think I was abandoning everyone." His throat tightened. "I was scared you'd be disappointed." A long pause followed, then Hyun spoke softly. "You know what I was scared of?" Felix looked up. "Being left behind." The words shattered something inside him, because suddenly everything made sense. All the hidden fears, all the misunderstandings, both of them had been protecting themselves, both of them had been afraid, and fear had built a wall between them. The rain gradually softened. The storm outside was passing, neither of them noticed. For several minutes they simply stood there, allowing the truth to exist between them. No masks, no performances, no carefully constructed defenses, just honesty, raw and uncomfortable. Yet strangely healing. Eventually Felix stepped forward, not close enough to force forgiveness, just close enough to show he wasn't running anymore. "I'm sorry." Words were simple, but they carried everything he had failed to say for months. Hyun closed his eyes. The hurt was still there. Trust could not be rebuilt in a single night. Some fractures required time. Some apologies required proof. Yet for the first time since entering the room, the tension eased slightly. Because truth, however painful, was finally standing in the open. And sometimes healing begins not when hearts stop hurting, but when people stop hiding. As the city lights shimmered beyond the rain-streaked windows, Felix and Hyun remained in the practice room, surrounded by silence, uncertainty, and hope. The future was still unclear. The distance between them had not disappeared, but neither had the bond that had carried them through years of struggle. For now, that was enough. For now, they simply stood together beneath the fading storm, learning that even broken trust could find its way back home. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and lingering exhaustion. Felix barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hyun's expression from the night before, not the tears, not the disappointment, the distance, that invisible space that had suddenly appeared between them. It haunted him more than anything. The dorm was unusually quiet when Felix entered the kitchen. The familiar scent of coffee drifted through the air. For a brief second, he hoped everything had somehow returned to normal. Then he saw the empty chair, the chair Hyun usually occupied every morning. A small ache settled in his chest. Looking for someone, Minho leaned against the counter. Studying him carefully, Felix forced a smile. "No, the lie was obvious," Minho sighed. "You should talk to him." "I already did," Minho replied. "You apologized, that's different." Felix lowered his gaze. Perhaps Minho was right. An apology was only the beginning. Trust wasn't rebuilt through words. It was rebuilt through actions. The realization followed him throughout the day, at practice, during meetings, even while everyone else laughed and joked between rehearsals. Hyun remained polite, friendly even. But something was missing. The effortless connection they once shared had become careful and measured, like walking across thin ice. Every conversation felt shorter, every smile felt weaker, and Felix hated it. That evening, after another long rehearsal, the others gradually left the building. One by one, their voices faded down the hallway. Soon only Felix remained, or so he thought. Soft piano notes drifted from a nearby studio. The melody stopped him immediately. Hyun. Felix would recognize that style anywhere. Slow, emotional, beautiful, the kind of music that revealed feelings words could never express. Without thinking, Felix followed the sound. The studio door was slightly open. Inside, Hyun sat alone at the piano. The room was dim except for a single lamp near the corner. Golden light spilled across the keys. His fingers moved gently, yet the melody carried unmistakable sadness. Felix remained silent, listening. For several minutes, he simply stood there. The music seemed to tell a story of friendship, of memories, of someone trying desperately to hold on to something slipping away. Then Hyun stopped playing. The final note lingered in the air. "No, you're there." Felix froze. Hyun didn't turn around. "Long have you been standing there?" A few minutes. Silence followed. Then Hyun released a tired sigh. "You should come in." Felix stepped inside. The door clicked softly behind him. Neither spoke for a moment. The atmosphere felt fragile, like a conversation balanced on the edge of something important. Finally, Felix glanced at the piano. "That was beautiful." Hyun stared at the keys. "It isn't finished. Maybe it doesn't need to be." A faint smile touched Hyun's lips. The first genuine smile Felix had seen since yesterday. It disappeared quickly, but it was enough. A small spark in the darkness. Felix took a seat nearby. "I used to think hiding things would make life easier." Hyun remained quiet. "But lately I keep realizing the opposite." Confession hung between them. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately." Hyun's hands rested motionless on the piano. "I know, I just want you to know I'm trying." The first time Hyun turned toward him fully, the sadness was still there, but so was something else, understanding. "You know what the worst part was?" Felix swallowed. "What?" "I wasn't angry because you got the opportunity." His voice was calm. "I was proud of you." Felix blinked. Hyun looked away. "I always would have been." Those words struck harder than any accusation, because they revealed exactly what Felix had underestimated. Not Hyun's strength, not his resilience, his loyalty. Felix felt his throat tighten. "Know that now?" Room grew quiet again. Outside, evening lights illuminated the city skyline. Cars moved like rivers of gold beneath the darkness. Eventually, Hyun stood. He walked toward the large studio window. Felix joined him. For several moments, they simply watched the city together, neither rushing to fill the silence, neither pretending everything was fixed, because it wasn't. Healing rarely happened that way. Then Hyun spoke. Are you really going? The question was gentle, honest. Felix nodded slowly. Yes, answer hurt, but this time there were no secrets, no avoidance, only truth. Hyun inhaled deeply. Few months. City lights reflected in the glass. For a moment neither moved, then something unexpected happened. Hyun laughed softly, not bitterly, not sadly, just softly. You really picked the worst possible way to tell me. Felix groaned. I know. Honestly, it was impressive. A reluctant smile appeared on Felix's face. You don't have to keep reminding me. I probably will. Laughter that followed felt strange, awkward, yet genuine. For the first time in days, the weight on Felix's chest eased, not because everything was solved, but because they were finally moving forward instead of backward. The road ahead would still be difficult. Distance would come. Changes would come. Nothing could stop that. Yet standing beside the window, looking out at the city they had grown up chasing dreams within, Felix realized something important. Friendship wasn't measured by perfect moments. It was measured by what survived after the imperfect ones. And despite the hurt, despite the mistakes, despite the heartbreak, neither of them had walked away. Perhaps that meant their story wasn't breaking apart after all. Perhaps it was simply becoming something stronger, something honest, something real. And for the first time since the stormy night in the practice room, hope no longer felt impossible.
Over the following weeks, life settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and different. The schedules remained demanding. Practice sessions stretched late into the night. Meetings filled the afternoons. Performances came and went. From the outside, everything looked normal. But Felix noticed the small changes, the things no one else seemed to see. Hyun no longer knocked on his door late at night just to share a random idea. The long conversations that used to continue until sunrise became shorter. There was still kindness between them, still trust slowly rebuilding, yet some invisible hesitation lingered. It was as if both of them were afraid of causing another wound. One rainy evening, Felix found himself alone in the recording studio. The room smelled faintly of coffee and warm electronics. A half-finished song played through the speakers. He listened carefully, then stopped the track. Something felt wrong, not with the music, with himself. For weeks he had focused on repairing what he had broken. But he had never truly asked why he had hidden the truth in the first place. The answer frightened him, because deep down, it wasn't only about protecting Hyun. It was also about protecting himself. Felix had spent most of his life trying to make everyone happy, trying to be the reliable one, the cheerful one, the person who never disappointed anyone. But the opportunity overseas had forced him to choose, and choices always created consequences. Perhaps he had hidden the truth because he couldn't bear seeing someone he cared about get hurt. Perhaps he had been running from guilt long before he was running from honesty. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The studio door opened. Hyun stepped inside. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable now, not awkward, just quiet. I thought I'd find you here. Felix smiled faintly. I could say the same. Hyun held up a paper bag. I brought food. Scent immediately filled the room. Felix laughed. You know exactly how to convince me to take a break. Years of experience. They sat on the floor beside the mixing console, sharing food, talking about ordinary things, the kind of conversation they hadn't had in months, movies, music, funny mistakes during rehearsals, memories from years ago. At some point, they both started laughing so hard that tears appeared in their eyes. And for a brief moment, it felt like nothing had ever changed. Then the laughter faded. Reality quietly returned. The departure date was approaching. Every day brought it closer. Neither of them mentioned it, yet both of them were thinking about it. Finally, Hyun spoke. Can I ask you something? Anything. What are you most afraid of? Felix looked down at the food container in his hands. The answer came immediately, but saying it aloud felt difficult. I'm afraid everyone will move on. The words surprised even him. Hyun remained silent. Afraid I'll come back one day and realize I don't belong anymore. Confession hung in the air, raw, honest, painfully vulnerable. Hyun stared at him for several seconds, then nodded slowly. I understand. Felix looked up. Hyun offered a small smile. Because I'm afraid of the same thing. Room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. For months, both of them had been carrying similar fears, yet neither had realized it. Perhaps that was the strange thing about loneliness. Sometimes two people could stand side by side while feeling completely alone. Felix felt a lump form in his throat. No, Hyun said quietly. When I first heard you were leaving, I thought I wasn't important enough. Felix's eyes widened. What? I know it sounds ridiculous. It does. Hyun laughed softly. I know, his smile faded. But that's what heartbreak does. Felix listened carefully. It convinces you that you're losing something because you weren't worth keeping. Honesty in those words hit hard, because Felix suddenly understood the depth of the hurt he had caused, not intentionally, but unintentionally all the same. Without thinking, he placed a hand on Hyun's shoulder. "You were never the problem." Hyun looked at him. "You never had to earn your place in my life." Neither spoke for several moments. The city lights shimmered beyond the studio windows, rain traced silver lines down the glass, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the night sky. Hyun finally smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind Felix had missed. "Getting better at this honesty thing." Felix laughed. "Painful, isn't it?" "Extremely." They both laughed again. The sound echoed gently through the studio. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Felix felt something shift, not completely, not magically, but enough to know they were healing, enough to know that trust was returning one conversation at a time. The weeks continued passing. Summer slowly gave way to autumn. Leaves turned gold and crimson. The air became colder. And before either of them were ready, the departure date arrived. The airport was crowded. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Travelers rushed in every direction. Yet standing among hundreds of strangers, Felix felt strangely calm. The members had come to say goodbye, laughter mixed with tears, photos were taken, promises were exchanged. Eventually, the final boarding announcement sounded. The moment everyone had been avoiding, Felix hugged each of them, then his gaze found Hyun. For a second, neither moved. Years of memories seemed to pass between them, all the struggles. All the victories, all the mistakes, all the forgiveness. Then Hyun stepped forward and pulled him into a tight embrace. Neither spoke immediately. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Finally, Hyun smiled. "You better come back." Felix laughed through suspiciously watery eyes. "I will." "You promise?" "I promise." Hyun nodded, satisfied, trusting. The sight nearly broke Felix's heart, because promises mattered most when distance made them difficult. As Felix turned toward the departure gate, he glanced back one final time. People he loved stood together beneath the bright airport lights, watching, waiting, believing, and as he disappeared into the crowd, he carried that image with him, not as a goodbye, but as a reason to return, because some connections survive distance, some survive mistakes, and some become stronger precisely because they were tested. Felix didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a very long while, he wasn't afraid of it. The first thing Felix noticed when he arrived overseas was the silence. Not literal silence. The city was alive. Cars moved endlessly beneath neon lights. Crowded streets buzzed with conversations in languages he barely understood. Music spilled from cafes. Trains rumbled through underground stations. Yet despite all the noise, something felt missing. Home. The realization followed him everywhere. His apartment overlooked a river that reflected thousands of lights after sunset. Most people would have called the view beautiful. Felix did. But beauty and comfort were not always the same thing. Some nights he would stand by the window long after midnight, staring at the unfamiliar skyline, and thinking about everyone he had left behind, especially Hyun. At first they talked frequently. Messages arrived throughout the day, photos, voice notes, random jokes, updates about rehearsals, new songs, embarrassing stories. The distance felt manageable. Then work became busier. Schedules grew more demanding. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Without meaning to, both of them started replying later. Not because they cared less, because life was happening, and life rarely waited for anyone. One evening, after an exhausting recording session, Felix returned to his apartment and collapsed onto the couch. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room felt unusually cold. His phone vibrated, a message from Hyun. For some reason, Felix smiled immediately, even before opening it. The message contained only one sentence. "Do you ever feel like you're living inside someone else's dream?" Felix stared at the screen. The words felt strange, different. He typed a response. "What happened?" Several minutes passed, then came the reply. "Nothing, just thinking." Felix frowned. After years of friendship, he knew when Hyun was hiding something, and he was definitely hiding something now. The problem was distance. If they were in the same city, Felix would have walked directly into his room and refused to leave until Hyun talked. Now an entire ocean separated them. The helplessness frustrated him. Over the following weeks, the messages continued. But something felt off. Hyun still joked, still laughed, still shared updates. Yet there was a heaviness underneath his words, a sadness he never fully explained. Felix tried asking. Each time Hyun brushed it aside. "I'm fine. Just tired. Worry about me." Answers never convinced him. One night, unable to sleep, Felix found himself scrolling through old photos. Years of memories filled the screen. Practice rooms, concerts, late-night meals, road trips, birthdays, moments frozen in time. Then he stopped on one particular picture. It had been taken years ago. Neither of them were looking at the camera. They were laughing at something completely forgotten. The photo wasn't perfect. The lighting was terrible. The angle was awkward. Yet it felt more valuable than anything else in his gallery, because it captured something real, something impossible to fake. Felix suddenly realized how much he missed that. Not just the people, the feeling, the certainty that someone understood him without requiring explanations. His phone rang unexpectedly. The screen displayed Hyun's name. Felix answered immediately. "Hey." Silence greeted him, then a familiar voice. "Did I wake you?" "You know it's impossible to wake someone who isn't sleeping." A small laugh came through the speaker. The sound eased some of Felix's worries, some, not all. For several minutes they talked about ordinary things, work, music, weather, nothing important. And yet both of them seemed reluctant to end the conversation. Finally, Felix asked the question he had been carrying for weeks. "What's wrong?" Silence, a long one, the kind that revealed more than words ever could. When Hyun finally spoke, his voice sounded quieter than usual. "Do you ever wonder if people only love certain versions of us?" Felix sat upright. The question immediately caught his attention. "What do you mean?" Another pause. "Sometimes I feel like everyone expects me to be strong." Honesty in those words made Felix's chest tighten. "And when I'm not?" Hyun laughed softly, but there was no happiness behind it. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be." Confession hung in the darkness between continents. Felix listened carefully, because this wasn't about work or stress or exhaustion. It was something deeper, something older, a wound that had probably existed long before this conversation. "You don't have to be strong all the time." Response came naturally, immediately. Hyun sighed. "I know. No, I mean it." Rain outside intensified, water streaked across Felix's windows. Allowed to have bad days, silence. Allowed to feel lost, more silence. Allowed to be human. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Felix heard something unexpected, a shaky breath, the kind someone takes when they're trying very hard not to cry, and suddenly he understood. The distance wasn't the hardest part. Not really. The hardest part was knowing someone you cared about was hurting and being unable to sit beside them, unable to offer a hug, unable to share the silence, unable to simply be there. Sometimes words were enough, sometimes they weren't. "Miss you." The words slipped out before Felix could stop them. Another silence followed, then Hyun laughed quietly. "I was wondering how long it would take you to say that." Felix smiled. "I was trying to sound mature." "You failed. Completely." The first time that night, both of them laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind that loosened the weight pressing against their hearts. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward happier memories, old stories, old mistakes, dreams for the future. Hours passed unnoticed. By the time they finally said goodbye, dawn had begun painting pale colors across the horizon. Felix remained by the window after the call ended. The city was waking up. Morning light reflected across the river below. For the first time in weeks, the loneliness felt smaller, not gone, but manageable, because distance could separate people physically. It could change routines, change schedules, change circumstances, but it could not erase years of trust, years of understanding, years of choosing to stay. As sunlight slowly filled the room, Felix realized something important. Home was never a place, it was people. And no matter how many miles stood between them, some people carried a piece of home wherever they went. Hyun was one of those people, and somehow, knowing that made the unfamiliar city feel a little less lonely.
Winter arrived quietly. One morning Felix woke up and discovered the city covered in snow. White rooftops stretched toward the horizon. Bare tree branches glittered beneath pale sunlight. The river outside his apartment moved slowly beneath a thin layer of ice. For a long moment he simply stood by the window, watching, thinking. Another year was coming to an end. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, time still felt unreal. His overseas project had become more successful than anyone expected. New opportunities continued appearing. Interviews, performances, collaborations. The future looked bright from the outside, yet success had a strange way of amplifying loneliness. The more people recognized his name, the more he missed the people who knew him before any of it mattered, especially on days like this, days when the world seemed beautiful enough to share. His phone buzzed. A photo appeared on the screen. Hyun had sent it. Felix immediately smiled. The picture showed a lopsided snowman. Its head leaned dangerously to one side, Its eyes were made from bottle caps, its smile looked slightly terrifying. Underneath the image was a simple message: I created art. Felix laughed so loudly that he nearly dropped his phone. A second message arrived. Why are you laughing? Because it looks haunted. I worked very hard on that snowman. It looks like it's planning revenge. Several seconds later came the reply. Jealous because my artistic genius is evolving. For the next 20 minutes they exchanged increasingly ridiculous messages about the snowman. By the end, both of them had completely forgotten about work. Forgotten about schedules, forgotten about stress. It felt like old times, and perhaps that was why the next message caught Felix off guard. Been writing again. Felix stared at the screen. Writing. Hyun had not mentioned writing for months, maybe years, not seriously. Whenever life became overwhelming, Hyun often turned to creative projects. Music, painting, poetry, things he rarely shared with anyone. What kind of writing? A longer pause followed, then came the response. Honest kind. Felix's smile faded slightly because those words carried weight. The honest kind, the kind that usually emerged when someone was trying to understand themselves. Later that evening they arranged a video call. The connection flickered briefly before stabilizing. And suddenly there he was, Hyun, sitting cross-legged on a couch, wearing an oversized sweater, hair slightly messy. Looking exhausted but somehow happier, Felix immediately noticed the difference. What happened? Hyun blinked. What do you mean? You look different. That's concerning. No, not physically. Felix leaned closer to the screen. You look lighter. For a moment Hyun said nothing, then a small smile appeared. I think I finally stopped pretending. Answer surprised him. Stopped pretending. What were you pretending about? Hyun glanced away briefly, as though organizing thoughts he had carried for a long time. Then he answered, I kept telling myself that being hurt meant I was weak. Room fell quiet. I thought moving forward meant ignoring everything. Felix listened carefully, but that's not healing. Honesty in his voice felt different now, stronger, more certain. I spent so much time trying to become who everyone expected me to be. A faint laugh escaped him. Turns out I didn't even know who that person was. Felix felt something warm settle in his chest because he understood. More than Hyun probably realized, the pressure to perform, to smile, to appear confident, to always be enough, it was exhausting, and sometimes people became so focused on meeting expectations that they forgot themselves along the way. You know, Felix said softly, I think we're both guilty of that. Hyun nodded immediately. No argument there. Conversation continued late into the night, hours passing unnoticed. They talked about dreams, fears, mistakes, things they had never fully discussed before. And somewhere during those conversations, Felix realized something important. The heartbreak from months ago had changed both of them, not just their friendship, themselves. The experience had forced them to confront parts of their identities they usually avoided: fear, attachment, insecurity, the need for approval, the fear of abandonment, all the hidden things beneath the surface. Painful lessons, necessary lessons. As midnight approached, Hyun suddenly stood. Wait here. Felix laughed. If I have somewhere else to go. Hyun disappeared briefly, then returned holding a notebook, the same notebook he had mentioned weeks earlier, the one filled with writing, his writing. Immediately Felix became curious. What's that? Hyun hesitated for perhaps the first time all evening, then he opened the notebook. Several pages were covered with handwritten notes, poems, thoughts, fragments of ideas. The pages looked worn, as though they had been read many times. I want to show you something. Felix's eyes widened. That alone was significant. Hyun rarely shared unfinished work, especially writing. Slowly Hyun flipped through several pages, then stopped. The room grew quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. This is the first thing I wrote after we fought. Felix felt his heart skip. Months had passed since then, yet the memory remained vivid. Hyun looked down at the page, then began reading. The words were simple, not dramatic, not poetic, just honest. They spoke about disappointment, about expectations. About learning that love and hurt could exist at the same time, about realizing that forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was choosing not to let pain become permanent. Felix listened without interruption. Every sentence felt deeply personal, not because it was about him, because it was about growth, about healing, about becoming someone stronger without becoming someone colder. When Hyun finished reading, silence filled the call. Neither knew what to say immediately. Finally Felix smiled, a genuine smile. That's beautiful. Hyun looked embarrassed. It's unfinished. What? Felix leaned back in his chair. The best things usually are. A second Hyun stared at him, then laughed, the familiar laugh Felix had missed for so long, warm, bright, real. Outside, snow continued falling beyond Felix's window. Inside, the distance between two cities suddenly felt smaller than ever, because some conversations change everything, not dramatically, not instantly, but quietly. Like sunlight entering a room after a long winter. And as the hours slipped toward morning, both of them found themselves looking toward the future with something they hadn't fully felt in a long time. Peace, not perfect peace, not complete certainty, just enough to keep moving forward. And sometimes that was more than enough. Spring arrived almost without warning. The snow disappeared. Trees that had stood bare for months slowly filled with color again. The city outside Felix's apartment transformed from shades of grey into a landscape of green and gold. Everything seemed to be moving forward, including him. The overseas project that once felt intimidating had become part of his daily life. He had learned new routines, met new people, and adapted to challenges that once seemed impossible. Yet there were still moments when his thoughts drifted home. Moments when a familiar song played in a cafe. Moments when he passed a bookstore and remembered hours spent wandering through similar places with friends. Moments when laughter from strangers reminded him of memories he carried everywhere. One afternoon after finishing an interview, Felix returned to his apartment and discovered an email waiting for him. The sender's name immediately caught his attention, Hyun, which was strange, because Hyun usually sent messages, never emails. Curious, Felix opened it. Attached was a single document, no explanation, no greeting, just 3 words. Read when alone. Felix immediately sat down. The attachment opened slowly, the title appeared first, then the pages beneath it. It wasn't a song. It wasn't a poem, it wasn't a story, it was a letter. A very long letter. For several minutes, Felix simply stared at the screen, then he began reading. The words were thoughtful, careful, honest. The letter spoke about the previous year. The misunderstandings, the disappointment, the healing, the distance. But most importantly, it spoke about gratitude. Gratitude for friendship, for patience, for second chances, for conversations that had helped both of them grow. One point, a particular sentence made Felix stop reading entirely. Sometimes the people who hurt us unintentionally also become the people who teach us how to heal. He read the sentence twice, then a third time. The words settled deeply inside him, because they felt true not only for Hyun, for himself as well. By the time he finished reading, nearly an hour had passed. The city outside continued moving. Cars crossed intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. The world remained unchanged. Yet Felix felt different. The letter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past. It was simply honest, and honesty carried a power all its own. Without wasting another second, Felix called him. The call connected almost immediately. Well, Hyun sounded nervous. Felix smiled. You knew I'd cry. A groan came through the speaker. I specifically tried to avoid that. You failed. I spent weeks writing that. It shows. A brief silence followed. The comfortable kind, the kind built over years rather than moments. Then Hyun laughed softly. Good. Felix leaned back in his chair. Outside, sunlight reflected across nearby buildings. For a while neither spoke, neither seemed in a hurry. Eventually Felix asked a question that had been on his mind for months. When did you stop being angry? The line went quiet, long enough that Felix wondered if he had asked something too personal. Then Hyun answered. I don't think there was a specific moment. His voice was thoughtful. Think I just got tired of carrying it. Felix listened. Anger feels heavy after a while. A pause, and honestly, yeah, I missed my friend more than I wanted to stay hurt. The words struck him harder than expected, not because they were dramatic, because they were simple, and simplicity often carried the deepest truths. Felix stared out the window for a moment, neither spoke, then he laughed quietly. You know, you could have just said that months ago. I know. Would have saved us a lot of trouble, probably. You're impossible. I've been told. Their laughter blended together through the call. The sound felt familiar, comforting, like returning to a favorite place after years away. As evening approached, the conversation gradually shifted toward future plans, projects, goals, ideas. For the first time, they weren't discussing how to repair the past, they were discussing the future. A subtle but important difference, the future. The thing both of them had been afraid of for so long. The thing that once seemed capable of separating them. Now it felt different, less threatening, less uncertain, because they had already survived something difficult. And surviving changed people, not by making them fearless, by teaching them that fear wasn't always the end of the story. Several weeks later, another opportunity appeared for Felix. A short break between projects, enough time for a visit home. The moment he learned the dates, he immediately sent a message. The reply arrived less than 30 seconds later. Finally, Felix laughed. That's your reaction. What reaction were you expecting? Something emotional. Several dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, the message arrived. Fine. Another message followed immediately. We missed you. Felix stared at the words, simple, honest, enough. His smile remained long after the screen went dark. Because sometimes the most meaningful things were not complicated. Sometimes they were 3 words. 3 words carrying an entire year of memories, an entire year of growth, an entire year of learning how to lose trust and find it again. As night settled over the city, Felix stood beside the window and looked toward the distant horizon. Somewhere beyond it was home. Closer now than it had been in months. Closer than it had seemed possible. And for the first time since boarding that plane so long ago, He felt excitement instead of uncertainty. The road had been difficult. Mistakes had been made, hearts had been hurt, but none of those things had been strong enough to destroy what truly mattered. Because real connections were rarely defined by perfect moments, they were defined by what remained after the imperfections. And what remained between Felix and Hyun was stronger than either of them had realized, not because nothing had changed. Because they had changed together. And somewhere beyond the distance, beyond the seasons, beyond the mistakes and the healing, a new chapter was waiting to begin. One built not on fear, not on secrets, but on trust.